Tonight, I will be sharing a few stories sent directly to my subreddit, from a story involving scary story narrations, a train station, and the paranormal. You guys sent in some really creepy stuff for this one, and it's very much appreciated. Thank you to all of tonight's writers. Remember, you can send in your own story if you'd like to have it featured. Stories can either be submitted at my subreddit, r/slumberreads, or my email that can be found in the description. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. What have I done? I'm trying desperately to figure out where to start here. My name is not important. I'm sharing my most recent events with you as, I guess, kind of a warning. For the past year, I've run a YouTube and podcast channel. I've recently deleted it, so please don't try to find it or the content I had created. What my channel mainly consisted of was stories, short horror stories created by its own fan base. I fell into it quite by accident, actually. I've always been into the spooky and unexplained, so I would often scour the internet for all things creepy. During a late night internet binge, I stumbled across an interesting looking video. Its thumbnail was simply a black and white security still from what looked to be a gas station or store. I've always been a sucker for odd things being caught off camera, so I didn't hesitate to click on the video. What I ended up getting was far different than what I expected. It was someone reciting a scary event that happened to them. At first I was disappointed, but wound up listening to the entire thing, entranced by the storyteller's voice, as well as the crazy events that took place. I won't go into detail on the story, but it was quite intriguing. It left me with that certain creepy feeling you get that is almost euphoric. I quickly clicked on the storyteller's channel and found another video with yet another scary encounter. Wait a minute. This guy is either a complete liar or he's held a very interesting life. Turns out, neither of those were the case. He was a storyteller. After a bit of research, I found there existed a subgenre of horror where short stories are read by narrators. The stories told were usually accompanied by creepy music and scary visuals to bring you in the right mood, and it worked. I was hooked. After listening to several different narrators tell some of the most amazing stories I'd ever listened to, I decided to take a crack at it. I mean, why not, right? I'm about to tell you one big reason why not. I quickly found telling these stories wasn't as easy as I first thought. I read through story after story in various places online, but found one particular social media platform ideal. It was littered with hundreds upon hundreds of these short horror stories, and I was thrilled. One setback I found was waiting for permission to use the original author's story. Sometimes it would be weeks before they got back to me. Sometimes they would respond immediately. Either way, I was starting to develop content. My first video was posted. I eagerly waited the view counts the next morning as I woke up. 0 views. Ouch. Maybe the story wasn't good enough. I continued on though, releasing several more stories. After some time, I found my stories were being viewed, usually only once or twice. One particular video even made it to 13 views. I was starting to see how this worked, and I was going to have to put in a good amount of work to get anywhere here. This was my original assumption until the message. I awoke one particular morning and, in my normal habit, I grabbed my phone and groggily began clearing my notifications. One particular notification stood out. It was the icon for the website I pulled my stories from. Someone must be getting back to me about using their story. This was not the case, however. It was a message from an author, but he was coming to me to narrate a story. Hey, I got your narration channel and listened to a few of your stories. You have a great voice for storytelling. If I send you my story, would you be kind enough to read it if you think it's good? The author wrote. I grinned at my phone knowing I may have reached a new point in my storytelling career. It had been quite the grind these past 3 months, with only being able to bring my sub count to 49. This was a breath of fresh air. Trying to not sound too excited, I replied, Sure, I'd be happy to check out your story, and if it fits the theme of my channel, I'd be honored to narrate it. I wrote back quickly, going back and forth cleaning up my typos. I sent him my email address and asked him to submit it there. Within seconds of sending it, I had an email notification. That was quick. He must be really excited to have his story read. I decided to get my first cup of coffee in before I began reading the story. Once fully awake, I opened my email and began reading. It was good. No, actually, it was great. This may have been the best story I've read in my entire 3 months of narrating, for reasons you'll see later. I will not be going into any details of this author's stories, not even the name, but I can tell you, I really enjoyed reading his work. I had 2 other videos primed and ready to go, but I wanted this one out first. I made time to record my narration, edit the video together, and post it ASAP. I even posted it a couple hours earlier than I usually do. I was so excited for it. Another day went by and I was ready to load up my next story when something caught my eye. 578. The number I was seeing on my monitor was almost gleaming at me like a treasure. My last video had 578 views. Apparently many people equally enjoyed the amazing story that was sent in. Another number stared back at me with my mouth hung open, as if I'd just struck gold. 204. My subscriber count had risen overnight from a measly 49 to 204. I guess you could say it was on a bit of a high the rest of the day. Another 2 weeks went by, and I continued to load more stories from various authors. I quickly entered back into my frustrated state as my view counts and subscribers came to almost a complete halt. I was still getting them, running anywhere from 10 to 20 views, and maybe 1 subscriber each week if I was lucky. I guess I had my one-hit wonder, and it was back to the grind. Another message popped up on my phone as I was changing for bed. My friend, I have another story for you I think you'll like. I just sent it to your email. Please enjoy. The message said from that same amazing author who helped me build my channel up, even though that's where it stayed. Absolutely, I wanted to say. Thank you for sending in your previous story. It was very well liked and my biggest video so far. I replied back, this time not trying to hide my excitement. A thought crossed my mind as I opened his email. I didn't know how he would ever be able to top his last story. I felt a wide grin across my face as I read on. The story was a bit longer, but even better than the first. I was entranced by the characters, the way I was brought into the setting, and the overall verbiage the author used made it such an easy read. This is great. I whispered to myself as I folded my arms on the desk, as if doing so was going to bring me into the story even more. I stayed up late to edit the video together. Another story from this talented author. I posted it and went to bed. To say I slept well would be an utter lie. I spent most of the night staring at the ceiling with that same childish grin on my face. I laid there, thinking of the characters from the story, how good the scenes were, and that twist ending. Wow. As I woke the next morning, I didn't even try to make it to my computer. I needed to know now. I checked my channel on my phone immediately. 2,056 subscribers. Whoa, I said to myself, as I contemplated if this was a glitch. I checked and rechecked. It was not. Just in the few minutes I was staring at my phone, I had gained another 11 subscribers. My last video must have been a hit. The video, I yelled to myself as I quickly changed pages. 8,119 views. My arm dropped to the bed with my hand still tightly gripping the phone. I stared at my wall in disbelief. I've done it. I've made my channel a success. Throughout the rest of the year, I still submitted stories from various authors. Some authors continually put out great writings, while others were a bit back and forth, but the author who helped me build my channel so quickly, his stories were getting better and better with every submission. At the point where I thought he couldn't top one story, he'd prove me wrong easily by the next. Why was this guy not filthy rich from his work? My channel continued to grow. With every story I put out, I would grow more and more. Notably, the spikes in views and subscribers were always on this author's work. I couldn't thank him enough when I replied to another submission. He wasn't gaining anything from this. I was, or so I thought. A full year had passed and I was at the height of my narration career. 2 frickin' million subscribers eagerly anticipated my stories every day. My channel was amazingly popular. Dozens upon dozens of authors lined up for me to tell their stories. I tried to make myself available to my favorite authors, but I made 100% sure my actual favorite authors were featured the day a story was submitted. He would send them in about every 2 to 3 weeks without fail, each story one-upping the last until he stopped. 6 weeks went by with no word from my friend who helped me out so much. Was he done? As I shut my computer down for the night, I noticed a green blinking light on my phone. I had a notification. Lighting my face in the darkness of my powered-down room, I saw I had a message from the author. Did he have a new story for me? He'd all but stopped messaging me on the website and simply emailed them to me without a word. I read the message. I've seen your success this past cycle. Congratulations. What do you say we finally meet in person? I'd like to see the face behind the voice, just as I'm sure you'd like to see the one behind the words. I reread the message several times with intrigue. He wanted to meet me, and I wanted to meet him. I replied, "You know what? I think that's a great idea. You've helped me so much with your wonderful talent. I'd love to get to know you in person." As I went to turn off my phone screen, I noticed 3 dots waving at the bottom of the chat box. He was typing. I pulled my hand from the power button and waited eagerly for the response. A new message popped up. That's great. I actually have a little get-together planned with a few of my friends. They're all fans of your work. You would be the guest of honor. Oh wow, I'm honored, my friend. I'd love to come. When is it? I typed hurriedly. It's in 2 days. I think you're going to have fun and see how much your work has inspired my friends. He replied back in a speed I was unsure how he could type that fast. 2 days? I really don't know if I can. I stopped typing and immediately erased the message. You know what? I'll be there. I quickly replied with a smile. Now, I'm going to stop telling the exact conversation here for a moment because I then asked him where his get-together was at. It was in a whole other state. Not only that, it was across the country. I really don't think I can make it, buddy. I don't really have the money or time to make a trip like that, I replied, my smile turning into a frown. I stared at the same 3 dots waving about the bottom of the screen. Check your mailbox, the message simply stated. A quick glimpse into my email showed no new messages. After a brief moment of confusion, I realized what he meant. My real mailbox. As I pulled the mail from the mailbox, sorting through all of the useless ads and bills, I spotted an unusual letter. It was an off-white color, with what appeared to be a seal over the envelope to keep it closed. The seal was a bit unusual. It was made in one of those old-timey wax seals with the design pressed down in the middle. My author friend may be older than I thought, if he's still sealing envelopes like this. I furrowed my brow as I looked at the insignia that was stamped down on the seal. It was a hollowed-out circle, with what appeared to be some strange language bordering the entire circle. Inside the circle was a form. It almost seemed like it was an attempt at a human form, but not human. The almost stick figure-looking design had no face. Its head was an upside-down triangle with another empty triangle inside of that, representing the blank face. Its arms were raised up but contorted back in on themselves, with elbows raised straight up. Its legs stuck straight out as if the form was floating with 2 circles for feet. It was indeed strange, but maybe this was normal artwork back in the old days. I quickly opened the letter as I plopped the rest of my mail on the kitchen table. Inside was 2 plane tickets. And a note. The tickets were for a flight from my town to where the author said he lived. He had already planned this before even talking to me. My eyes drew to the note. Door 4 was all that was read. The next couple of days were stressful. I didn't know what to expect, but I still wanted to make the trip and meet my friend who helped me so much. I didn't post any videos in those 2 days. I tried to make more recordings, but my nerves got the best of me, and I gave up fairly quickly. I stepped off the plane with my bag slung over my shoulder. I let out a heavy exhale as I looked down at the note. Door 4 was the only thing on the page, but I must have read it a dozen times by now. As I exited to the main area of the unfamiliar airport, several automatic glass doors were opening and closing, letting people in and out of the airport. All of them had large white numbers. I could see 7, 8, 9, and 10. I knew which direction to go. As I approached door 4, I stopped in my tracks for a brief bout of hesitation. The sun beamed through the glass, signifying dawn was quickly approaching. I exited the building and was caught off guard by an unexpected sight. A long, black limousine was parked with a well-dressed man in a suit, holding a sign with my name on it. I made my greetings and was off to meet my author friend. Thoughts spun in my head about who this person was. He's clearly well off. Was he actually a famous author and decided to make stories just for me to entertain myself? That's way too far-fetched. Either way, the anticipation built more and more as we rode on. The trip was longer than expected. Nighttime had hit by the time we had made it. An old, Victorian-style house appeared through the darkened trees. The night sky was eerily devoid of stars as we approached the large home. As we parked in front of the mansion, I was caught off guard by yet another unexpected sight. Dozens of people were walking from the front door of the house in a single file line. Well, what is this all about? I whispered to myself as I shut the limo door. I watched for several seconds as more and more people walked out of the home, all never lifting their heads as they stared at the ground. Their eyes glossed as they continued their slow trek forward. A strong feeling of dread coursed through me as I realized something was not right. I made an awkward throaty gurgle as I jumped at someone touching my shoulder. It was the limo driver. He didn't say a word as he, too, stared at the ground. His other hand lifted up as I slowly turned away in concern. He was handing me a piece of paper. "Join us," is all it said. No, this isn't right. "I'm leaving. Now," I said, raising my voice with each word. The driver didn't acknowledge my plea and joined the line of people lazily walking in one direction. I was done. The sight I was seeing was beyond abnormal. I ran in the opposite direction to get away from this. Cult is the only word that sprung to mind. I ran for several minutes but was stopped by an ominous view. I grasped the closest tree branch I could as I was looking out over a dark, vast valley of forest. I was a long way away from civilization. There was only one thing to do. I began back in the direction of the old mansion. I stared, frightened at what I was seeing. More and more people were walking out of that house. Walking isn't even the right word. They were shuffling, slowly, yet in sync. I had to do something. I couldn't wander aimlessly in a dark forest hoping to come across something. These people paid no mind to me before. I don't think they will now. I walked at a brisk pace towards the house. I was relieved to find I was correct as I entered the house. None of the people even acknowledged my presence. Even when I bumped shoulders with a few of them trying to get into the door, the house was dark and only lit by a candlelight. If I was in a better state of mind, I would have been in awe of the obviously old trinkets and antiques littered across the house, all in pristine condition. Although creepy in the flicker of the candles, there had to be a phone somewhere in this house. It's old, but it can't be that old. I was wrong. After shuffling through room after room, no phone, no computer, no access to the outside world, I began turning more agitated as I opened drawers and old chests, hoping to find something to help me communicate to the outside world. I was stopped in my search as I caught a glimpse outside. Hundreds more people filled the mansion's courtyard. They were all swaying back and forth with heads lowered. They were seemingly waiting their turn to join the line as their heads wobbled back and forth. I let out a shiver as a cold chill ran up my spine. This isn't happening. My noisy venture through the house was becoming more noticed. The people walking in a straight line began changing direction. My direction. Their heads still hung low as they walked in from the hallway. The room began filling with the shuffling sounds of them as I began to panic. I let out a high-pitched yelp and began charging through them. They didn't ignore me this time. The grasp of them attempting to hold me down were so strong. They appeared so weak as they walked, but now had an unimaginable strength as they held me. A searing pain was felt as a piece of cloth was strewn around my mouth, pulling my head back. I could feel the sides of my mouth tearing as I let out a muffled scream. I relented to them and fell to my knees. Effortlessly, they lifted me up and continued their slow, plodding journey to my unknown. I clenched my eyes. The pain of their grasp were almost too much to handle. My vision began to blur as I almost passed out from the pain. Suddenly, The pain lightened up. As I opened my eyes, at the relief I felt, I gained a sense of weightlessness briefly as I was dropped to the ground. I didn't want to acknowledge my surroundings. I began to crawl away on all fours with haste as I pulled the cloth from the newly formed divots on either side of my mouth. Blood poured from them as I removed it. More strong grasps were felt as the people began grabbing at me once more. "Stop it. Damn you, stop." I yelled in the most intimidating voice I could muster up. They stopped. All of them simply ceased their assault and stood up straight. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of emotion on their faces. It was subtle, but it was there. Their heads raised from their formerly lazy droop as they stared at me. Several silent seconds passed as I jolted back to the grasp of one of them. It wasn't the strong, violent grab from before. He gently lifted me to my feet and outstretched his hand forward as if to say, "This way." I panned the crowd around me as I realized where we were. The darkness around us echoed with water drips in the silence as I found myself staring at the large cave walls. "What is going on?" I said, putting my hands up in defense. A loud gasp was heard from the crowd. What was this? Why can't I get through to these people? "Please, let me go. I won't tell anyone." I pleaded as I felt a tear roll down my cheek. Another grouping of gasps was heard, as well as low murmurs on each side of me. Several of them almost mustered a smile. As if instinctual, the people began walking again. Simultaneously, I felt a hand on my back as if to guide me with them. I gave in. What else could I do? I walked with them. The cave seemed darker than ever as we approached a particularly narrow tunnel. I conformed to the single file line as we entered. A much larger area awaited us. Candlelit walls flickered across the large room as the sight of hundreds upon hundreds more people appeared. All silent, all staring at me. I stopped, quietly staring back as the people behind me walked around me on either side to enter. I opened my mouth to yell out to anyone who could understand me. I was interrupted. "My friend, welcome. I can't tell you how much this means to me, to us, to have you here." A deeply growled voice echoed from the cavernous walls. I couldn't find the source of the voice, but it was the only intelligible voice I've heard since arriving. "Who are you? Let me out of here now." I yelled as my voice echoed into the darkness. Suddenly a grouping of people started apart. A strange, hooded person began to appear in the crowd. His purple robes flowed as he walked. I assumed this was the leader of this cult. I began walking towards him as everyone parted from me as well. As we approached the middle of the enormous cavern, I was met with the sight of a large man. I peered up at him, trying to get a glimpse of his face through the hood. "Thank you for all you've done for us. I wanted to meet you face to face to show you my appreciation. Our appreciation," he remarked in a much lower, deep, growled voice. I moved to speak yet again, but was interrupted. He slowly lifted his hand to reveal a large, dark gray and green hand. He lifted one finger, showing a long black talon-like fingernail. As his hand approached his face, he lifted his head up to show a dark-colored, rigid face with a short, pointy nose pointed downward. A smile came across his face, showing jagged teeth pointing in all directions. Streams of saliva connected his top and bottom teeth as his mouth opened. "Shh," he whispered as he put his long finger to his mouth. That's when I noticed his eyes. They were large, bloodshot eyes bulging out of the sockets. He had no eyelids. His eyes seemed impossibly large as he stared at me with his psychotic grin. I stood, frozen in terror. As he put his large hand on my shoulder to lead me in the direction he just came from, he began to speak. "You have done more for me than read my little stories, my friend. You see, the human mind is surprisingly easy to manipulate. Certain phrases, certain word combinations, can allow the mind to be accessed, much like your little computers. That little computer, though, allowed me to reach you. I knew you had the talent to draw in the amount of people I needed. This is why I messaged you." I stared forward in disbelief at what I was hearing as we continued our walk. Those that were susceptible to my words knew what to do. "And here they are," he continued, letting out a laugh. We stopped walking as he peered down, beckoning me to join him in what he was looking at. An old, beat-up laptop computer lay on a flat slab of rock. To the right of it, stacks of papers full of words were strewn around with an old ink pen laying across them. I recognized the writing. It was his stories. His stories. I broadcast to the world. You must go now. Take this with you. He said as he offered me a sheet of paper. I didn't speak. I simply watched as he walked to the front of the crowd of people who were all staring forward, no longer moving. The author lifted his hands up on either side as a rumble was felt beneath my feet. I was the only one to react as I ducked down to keep balance. The dark cave was slowly lit by a bright light. I shielded my eyes as I looked up to the sight of the entire cavern wall lit up in a green, smoky mist. Like a moth to a flame, everyone began slowly lurking towards the lit up wall. One by one they disappeared into that wall. The author turned to look at me as he lowered his hands, putting one finger up to his lips as if to say, "Shh." One more time. He began walking with the people. I watched as he too disappeared into the mist. A good hour must have gone by as I stood, frozen, watching the hundreds of poor souls follow that creature into the unknown. I looked down at the laptop in a rage as I grabbed it and smashed it to pieces on the stone slab. No one paid much attention as the last few of them walked into the mist. I quickly left as the cavern fell eerily silent. The darkness began to take over as this sort of portal closed. As I made my way out, the friendly sight of stars had returned paired with a brightly lit moon. I gazed at the piece of paper the author handed me. It was a notarized letter. I read through in disbelief. He left the giant mansion to me and everything inside, which included an old, pristine vintage car, keys still inside. I didn't care if I damaged it though. I drove it back to town and with the second ticket, flew home. I never returned to that place, nor told anyone about the mansion that was left to me. This is the first time I've let this story out. Only reason being is these short horror stories are becoming more and more popular. I only ask you to be careful, storytellers and listeners alike. Know where your stories are coming from, and if the stories are a little too good, maybe look the other way. No, man, don't be dumb. I mean something that we can actually do. What you're talking about is all, what's the word? Hypothetical, Eric said, somewhat disturbed by Martin's proposition. Rain trickled down the blackened window outside the house as Martin rolled his eyes. It's not dumb, okay? It's just a bit hard to wrap your head around. A rambling Martin replied. My granddad told me about this when I was a kid, and believe me, he's not the type to make this stuff up. I didn't say a word. Instead, I just sat there pondering on what Martin had said, equally intrigued and frightened. Eric piped up again. So, you're trying to tell us what exactly? Martin huffed before explaining again. I'm only going to explain this one more time, so you'd better listen. Okay, so when my granddad was a kid, maybe 18 or 17, I can't remember the specific details, so just bear with me on this one. But in essence, through some form or another, he and his friends stumbled across this game, or this ritual, or whatever word you want to use, though back in the day, they knew it as the act of Aperio. Aperio? Eric interrupted. What the hell is that supposed to mean? I don't know, man. I didn't name the thing. Martin hissed before continuing. Anyway, as I was saying, the only way my granddad ever explained to me how to start the game is really quite simple. First, it had to be performed a few minutes after 3 in the morning. The witching hour, he called it. Then, you must head down to the subway. You know the one. Just past your house, Andy. He said, pointing at me. He was right. I did know of a subway station near to my house. It was an old grimy place which only the desperate used. Now he said it must be that subway. Any other one won't work. He said there was some sort of enchantment on the tracks down there. He never went into any more detail on that. Okay, so it's 3 a.m. and you're at the station. What then? Mike inquired, a hint of irony in his voice. Well, then it gets slightly weirder. There's actually another stop before that I probably should have mentioned. You must bring with you a totem of some sort, like an object which has strong sentimental value to you. So, for instance, it could be the last picture you have of a loved one, something with a deep emotional connection to you. So not a participation trophy or anything like that. So when you get down there are some details you should take note of, or check if you've done it properly. If there are any other people waiting at the station, you've done it wrong. If a train with any passengers in it stops at the station, you have done it wrong. If the time reads anything other than 3:01, 3:02, or 3:03 when you arrive there, you have done it wrong. Once down there with your totem, if everything has been done correctly, you must wait. Wait for exactly 6 trains to stop at the station and pass on down the tracks. Do not get on any of them. After you've counted the 6 trains, the time should be around 4 or something like that. Now you should be able to hear the faint sound of a 7th train rolling down the tracks. This is the one you'll be getting on. Wait, hold on. You're not actually suggesting we have to get on a haunted train, are you? Eric interrupted once more. Martin scoffed. Okay, for one, it's not a haunted train. And 2, I have absolutely no intention of doing this myself. I just thought you would enjoy the story. He confirmed. Eric sat back against the bedroom wall. I could tell he was eager for Martin to be done with his ramblings, but I wasn't. I urged Martin to finish explaining, as if he wasn't already going to anyway. Right now, this is the scary part. This 7th train should stop at the station. No passengers should be inside. Grip your totem tightly and get on board. The way my grandfather explained this next part varied. He said what happens next completely depends on the person performing the ritual. Once the train starts going down, it will take you through a place he lacked the words to describe. He said some of his friends theorized it was another dimension, a dark place where the souls of dead passengers were trapped to ride the train for eternity. Another one of his friends thought it was some kind of portal to your own mind, where you could experience all your deepest, darkest fears. One friend even thought it was a train to the afterlife, limbo, purgatory. My granddad didn't know what he thought it was, but the game is dangerous. If at any point you lose sight of yourself or where you came from, you could never be able to leave. He said you must believe that sooner or later the train will arrive back at the station where you can finally leave. If you don't believe this fact, then it will never come and you will be stuck there. Martin finished his explanation, leaving Eric chuckling, and me curious beyond description. I was fascinated by his recount. I can't measure the interest that had sparked within me, yet I cannot recall the point in which I inevitably decided to do it. I didn't tell the boys of what I planned to do the next day. I would wait until it was over to tell them all the things I had seen. I couldn't sleep that night. I was kept up by visions of this other plane which Martin had so inelegantly described. I longingly pictured myself hopping off that train, having had a glimpse into a place beyond life and death. I had to see it. Back at my own house the next day, I scurried around the unkempt place for what I thought I knew was my totem. A fine silver trinket containing a picture of my late grandfather, a veteran of 2 wars. When he was alive, he spoke not of what he saw during those years, but his son, my father, told all. To me, my grandfather sounded not dissimilar to a superhero. A connection to him would surely be my talisman. I found it, nestling between a pair of glasses and a vase on a windowsill. It was a small, pretty thing which flipped open to reveal the picture. The chain which kept it hanging from my neck was broken down the center. In my pocket was where it must stay. The time was 11:15 when I shoved the ornament into my trouser pocket amidst a key and some lint. It would be a long day before it would be time to go. I snuck into the kitchen, creeping as my bare feet smacked the cold tiles. As to not alert my parents, I opened the pill cabinet cautiously. I knew my father had trouble sleeping sometimes. His tablets were what I was looking for. The red label on the bottle caught my eye immediately. I snatched it up and popped a couple of the small tablets into my mouth. After doing so, I carefully placed the bottle back where I found it before closing the cabinet and crawling back upstairs. I slipped into my bed, hopeful that I could sleep my way through the day. I needed my head to be clear if I was to try this bizarre ritual. I woke with a sudden twitch in my bed. I was sure I had dreamt something, but I couldn't recall what it was. The space outside my window was black. I snatched my phone off my bedside table and turned it on. The light of the phone was blinding in the darkness. I squinted and read the time. My eyes widened as I read 12:23. I had slept for more than a full 12 hours, and what puzzled me more was that neither my mother or my father had woken me. My stomach growled. I was famished. Barely caring if I awoke my parents, I ran downstairs for something to eat, my grandfather's locket rattling in my pocket as I did. After fixing myself a small meal, I took it up to my bedroom. As I chomped down on my food in my bed, I pondered on what Martin had told me. If it truly is different for everybody, I wondered what form it would take for me. Is it a glimpse into the afterlife, or a dive into your subconscious? What was the likelihood I was to get trapped there? Low, I thought. Surely if Martin's grandfather did it for fun, it couldn't be that dangerous. 1:07 was the time when I finished eating. I spent the next hour listening to music and staring out my blackened bedroom window, fixated on the ominous white hue of the moon. I figured I would leave at 2:50. The subway was just around the street. It wouldn't take me long to get there. 2:33 was when I began to become nervous. I was always one to entertain local rituals and urban legends. I can't count the number of times I had stood in front of a mirror attempting to summon Bloody Mary, but I had never done anything as extreme as this. 2:46. I crept downstairs, slipped on my shoes. My hand fumbled around in my pocket, checking if I still had my totem and a key to the house. They were still there. 2:50. I rarely creaked the front door open and wandered out into the cool night air, closing the door quietly behind me. I began tracking down the paved street under the wiring glow of the streetlights. My hands in my pocket, I turned the corner to reveal a long street. The stairs to the subway at its end. I walked down to it nervously. I pulled my talisman out of my pocket as I reached the top of the steps, clutching it tightly in my hand to the point where it hurt my palm. I stopped, looking down the steps into the murky, putrid ambience of the subway. I checked the time on my phone once more. 3:01. Perfect. Just the time Martin had said, I thought. With a tense sigh, I entered, inching down the steps. As I descended, the view of the inside became clearer, and it was at that point I came to the revelation that I had never actually used this place. The interior was barren. Ugly yellow tiles covered the walls, and the floor was littered with grime. The place was lit by a row of menacing, cylindrical red lights, which buzzed monotonously overhead. At the end of the hall were the tracks. I walked to the edge. In both directions, the tracks shot off into a pair of looming, unlit tunnels. Still clutching the locket, I waited by the tracks. 6 trains in, is what Martin said. 6 trains before the dreaded 7th. The one I'd be getting on. Before long, I heard the low growl of a train coming from the right tunnel. The first of 6. I peered down the tunnel. The light of the train grew as it whizzed down the tracks before eventually slowing to a crawl at the station. Once it had halted in front of me, the doors opened with a wheeze, revealing a sight I nearly dreaded. It was empty. Not a single soul on board, but I wasn't sure if the lack of people was a result of the ritual or just simple coincidence. My hypothesis, however, was quickly squandered as a train after train came, all devoid of people. Finally, once the station was silent and the 5th train passed, I was left somewhat chilled and haunted by the character of this desolate place. But as vulnerable as I felt at that point, more ghastly and terrible things were soon to dwarf that sensation. A sense of looming dread struck me suddenly as my grasp tightened around the wilting hope that was my totem. As much as I might have wanted to, I felt as though I couldn't leave, like I was too far gone. The 6th train came on hurriedly, taking much longer than the rest to arrive at the squalid station. Believing I was now in a prodigious state of danger, I watched it come hurtling from the dark tunnel, stopping before me with a screech. Lo and behold, as the train doors opened, it was empty. It lingered in front of me hauntingly for more than a few moments before crawling across the upcoming tracks like the rest. It disappeared slowly into the left underpass. I pulled out my phone with my free hand. 4:13. That seemed about right. It felt like an eternity passed after I did. However, I remember checking the time once more, and to my confusion it read the same, 4:13. I let what felt like a few more minutes pass before checking again, 4:13. As I stood partially fatigued on the stone floor, I began to hear the eerie echoes of another train rumbling down the adjacent tracks. The suspension of time had puzzled me to the point where I damn near forgot to expect the seventh. To say I was mentally unprepared was an understatement, but I couldn't stop now. I thought if I went back home at that point, the curiosity would haunt me to the grave. As the sound grew and the headlights flickered down the way, I wondered what ancient secrets the train might hold, secrets that I was about to discover. It halted clumsily, just like the rest, but unexpectedly, as it did, there came to me the purest trance-like ecstasy I have ever known. A shining tranquility came with the ornate grating of manganese steel resting on the tracks. The thing had no recognizable, remarkable quality, but nonetheless, it held me in a hypnotic suspension. Its outside was partially corroded, like any old train would be. The windows were stained, and the stench of old metal filled my nose. The sight itself was simple, as it was stupefying. The doors began to open automatically, but stopped halfway through. The rust paused their opening. In a spellbound daze, as if possessed, I walked to the ajar sliding doors. My hand still holding onto the locket, I squeezed through the tight entryway and onto the train. Try as I might, I couldn't get control of my tired limbs. The one thing I could move, however, was my eyes. I scanned the interior as my body moved its way to a seat. Like the others, it was empty, but it didn't feel that way. It looked like any train, and much like the exterior, it was remarkable in no way. It was the sensation that came with entering that was remarkable. My body sat down mechanically before control was handed back to me suddenly. I shook my head, and my hands desperately just to make sure. Still sitting, I watched the doors slam shut. Shortly after the train began to move, chugging slowly along the tracks and into the tunnel, finally, my journey had begun. Outside the windows was nothing but blackness, appearing more of an endless void rather than the inside of an underpass. The only sounds to be heard was the painful screech of metal and the train scraping across the track below. As I sat there timidly, my sense of foreboding and constraint increased. Despite this though, a part of me was still filled with a morbid anticipation. Besides, there was a surprisingly calming aspect of the place. Something about the darkness outside inspired some kind of cosmic beauty inside me, but this sensation would soon fade as the train began to slow. Eventually it stopped completely, but out the blackened window was no station. Instead, it was just the same familiar blackness. I caught up and peered out the window. Perhaps the station was further down the tracks. I looked in both directions to find no such post. As my hypnotized gaze was fixated outside, I heard the twisted sound of the doors slowly screeching open. The unbroken monotony of the steel doors opening was a source of mistreated terror to me. I backed away, keeping a haunted eye on the door. I began to hear a soft, muffled sound which I did not recognize nor want to hear. The thought alone was a sound coming from the featureless abyss more than unsettled me. The sound was that of a growing squelching, interspersed with what I understood to be the fluttering of wings. The sound got continuously louder, and before my heart could beat out of my chest, the visage of a sight which equally terrified and confused me entered my peripheral. A filthy, shambling figure, around the size of the average male, trudged onto the train from out of the darkness, bringing with him a brown, wet sludge which marked his footsteps. The features of his face were barely visible. Covering all but his gibbous eyes was a horde of swarming locusts, which fluttered and crawled around his forsaken face. The image had me in a panic state of near delirium at the sight of the man. I said nothing. Instead, I let out a hopeless gasp. The man adorned an unkempt suit which once might have looked presentable. Without passing me no more than an abandoned glance, the locust-covered man sat, placing his hands on his knees. I couldn't look away from him. The belligerent swarm of bugs relentlessly twitched and seethed on his unmoving face. My eyes lingered on the pestilent figure for longer than I cared to recall, but as I watched his motionless frame, a thought occurred to me. The doors weren't closing. I dared not turn away from the man until I heard another set of belches and mud. Through the unclosing door, the same one that first man had come through, another entered. A woman donning a sunny yellow dress with another abundant horde of taxonomic locusts on her head and face, equally vile and shimmering as the last. The woman's eyes winced and grimaced as she sat opposite the man. I, the silent observer, had my back pushed to the end of the carriage, getting as far as possible from the tortured strangers. Still, the doors did not close. After the woman sat herself up in an identical position as the man, I heard a sound I half expected, the stifling of mud and the light fluttering of wings. Another person, a boy this time, entered the train, his head swarmed by the same putrid insect. Then after him another, then another, then another. The carriage was now filled with tormented commuters. The doors closed and I covered my mouth to protect from the lingering bugs, which crept along flesh and raged upon the metal. With a croak, the train started up again. I squeezed into the corner as it did, flailing violently at the bugs. I clasped my totem, remembering what Martin had said. If I want to leave, I must will it so. Every fiber of my being prayed to be off the train. I cupped my head in my hands and wished to anyone who might be listening to get me home. A hopeless tear trickled down my face before seeing, through the gaps between my fingers, the inside of the carriage began to take on an ominous blue hue. I put my hands down, my vision still impaired by the locusts, and covered the interior. I saw it. The space out the windows was no longer a black and cloudless chasm, but instead, an infinity of glowing water. The train was underwater, as if going along a seabed. I looked in awe out the window, still, absently swatting away the locusts. But perhaps most peculiar of all, teeming within the infinite waters of salt foam, legions of people, their details clear as day, dressed in everyday clothes, as though on a day out. These people fought. Every one of them engaged in a brisk and violent fight, their blows slowed by the endless blue. Some battered and brutalized men and women continued to exchange hits, unrelentingly. I swear some sections of water were tinted red, my fellow passengers still undisturbed and unmoving. Tides of aqua thrashed against the stained windows. Suddenly, and without warning, the doors of the accursed train shot open. I turned to them. Water poured into the train, snatching up myself and the other passengers in its current, and in an instant, I was pulled from the train and into the submerged battleground. In my panic, I clawed upwards at the water, unknowingly realizing my grasp on the locket. What eldritch nightmare world have I been cast into? Strange colors danced before my eyes, red, blue, and pieces of tattered cloth, people still tearing at each other with fire in their souls. Every trifle of the scene could be only imagined in the lucid dreams of a madman. No matter how I tried, every time I would attempt to reach the surface, the dread waters would pull me back down. My arms and legs burned as I emptied my lungs into a gargling scream. My vision blurred, and I couldn't tell where my skin ended and the water began. On the verge of unconsciousness and oblivion, I was engulfed in a scantling of thin blood as my throat filled with salt and water. Visions of my blue and bloated body crossed my fleeting mind before the world turned black. With an anguished wail, I shot up on my bed, sweating, panting. I was back in my room. I slumped back down, rubbing my forehead. The relief was something indescribable. It took me a few moments to recuperate, but after I did, I peered toward the window. The comforting glow of a street lamp lit the dark street outside. I must have taken too many sleeping pills, I thought. I climbed out of my bed, chuckled as I saw the wet imprint my cold sweat had left on the sheets. I left my room for a drink. Once on the upstairs hallway, I noticed a peculiar disparity downstairs. A strange white hue emitted from there. Nervously, I descended the steps, the front door slowly coming into view. I reached the bottom, my hands trembled, and my blood ran cold as I saw it. My familiar wooden front door was no more. Instead, in its place, something which much more resembled the partially rusted sliding doors of a train, and beyond them, the faint white glow of a carriage. In all my years of having a deep fascination with the paranormal such as ghosts, aliens, cryptids, and generally anything unexplained, I've only ever had one encounter that I still cannot explain. Due to a roommate bailing out on our lease, I was forced to shack up with a buddy of mine and his wife. It was a small 2-bedroom apartment, but he welcomed me with open arms. They had a toddler that the second room was for, but they said she never goes in there and sleeps with them every night, so it was no problem to take the room for my own. A couple weeks went by with no incident. However, I did notice the room was a good 10 degrees cooler than the rest of the house at all times. No problem. I'll just wrap myself up in the blankets. I've always been a heavy sleeper, so it takes me some time to wake up in the morning, as I zombie around for a good hour first. One particular night, I woke out of my sleep and lifted my head to adjust the pillow. As soon as I did, I noticed something in the far corner of the room. The entire room was lit with moonlight, except for one dark silhouette of a human form standing in the corner, staring at me. This figure had no features besides the dark outlining of a broad-shouldered man standing, watching. It may have been my grogginess, but he was very tall, as well, with his head almost touching the ceiling. Due to being 90% still asleep, I didn't acknowledge what I had seen, and fell back asleep on my newly adjusted pillow. The next morning I awoke to a much brighter sunlit room. I remembered what I saw last night in the form standing in my room. After a quick glance at the same corner, I shrugged it off as a dream and went on with my life. A couple more months went by, with no more shadowy figures staring at me, or at least, that I was consciously aware of. I was going to be moving to my new place with my then girlfriend, and we were just waiting for the lease to start. One night during that wait, I encountered the silhouetted man one more time. The details of this encounter were exactly the same. I awoke, adjusted my pillow, saw the giant shadow staring at me, thought nothing of it, and drifted off to sleep. Once again, to repeat my encounter to the letter, I woke the next morning remembering what I saw, and quickly darted my eyes to the corner. Okay, there has to be something to this. Moving day arrived and I decided to tell my buddy, who was gracious enough to let me stay, my 2 encounters with the silhouette. His reaction surprised me. Yeah, our daughter doesn't go in there, and just points to the room saying, scary man, when she gets close to it. Told me as if it was no big deal. After letting out a sarcastic, now you tell me, we continued with the move. I've never had a ghost experience before or after that, and is my one little talking point to others who are interested in the same paranormal stories as I am. His presence always stuck in my mind, though. I even put him on one of my short horror stories when I first started writing. Of course, that story was fictional. This one is not. In 2012, I went to band camp with my daughter, who was going into her sophomore year at high school. I was super excited and proud that she joined marching band. She played the flute. The campground we went to is mainly a Boy Scout campground, but was also used by Girl Scout troops and high school bands. The kids were separated into girls in one cabin, boys in another across the practice field with the appropriate chaperones, moms and dads, volunteers, etc. Band camp days consisted of waking up early, going to mess hall and eating, then straight to the field for all-day practice. The only breaks were for meals, bathroom, or to get hydrated, as it was also very hot during the day. After the kids would get started with practicing the show routine, us moms would watch for a while, then either go take walks or go back to the cabin and take our showers. The girls' cabin consisted of a boys' and a girls' bathroom. The next morning we were there is when the weirdness started. The girls refused to utilize both bathrooms to shower and get ready, and they would all pile into the girls' bathroom. I was like, what the heck? I'm gonna go where no one else is, and had my own bathroom, so to speak. I walked into the bathroom to use the toilet after waking up. As I was sitting in the stall, I heard what you would think is the kind of noise you'd hear from steam pipes. I looked up and saw that there were pipes, so didn't think anything more about it. Went about brushing my hair and teeth to get ready for the day. Every time I would go into the bathroom, I would hear this noise, kind of a hissing or whispering sound. About the 3rd time of going to use the bathroom and hearing this, I would sit there and try to tune into it, because it honestly started to sound like whispering, and I would be the only one in the cabin. Everyone else was out in the field. I also started to get this weird feeling that I was not alone, that feeling of being watched. The 2nd morning, I'm using the bathroom. The noise is louder and actually sounds like a voice. I just continue what I'm doing, brush my teeth, brush my hair. As I'm putting my hair up into a ponytail, I hear this voice clear and plain as day, right next to my right ear. Hey, can you hear me? I instantly froze, arms in midair. Looked to my right to see who was standing there. Nobody. I scooped up all my stuff off the counter and booked it out of that bathroom so fast. I threw my stuff on my bunk and couldn't get out of the cabin fast enough. I ran all the way back to the field. I didn't step another foot into the boys' bathroom the rest of the week. Gave the doorway a very wide berth every time I walked by it. I used the girls' bathroom the rest of the time. I told my daughter what happened, and that was it. I don't know who or what it was. Didn't want to know. And I certainly didn't want any attachments upon leaving. I have been in tune with the spirit world since the 3rd grade. I've always been able to feel spirits. A clairsentient. I've been touched, seen things in my peripheral vision, but never spoken to. That really freaked me out. So I have blocked myself off a little from the spirit world, kind of like a protective barrier. I have other stories that have happened over the years since childhood that I will share. I just wanted to get this one out. Hope you enjoyed, and thank you for reading and or narrating. I'm terrified. I'm sitting outside of a Starbucks using their free Wi-Fi with a Reddit account I just made because it's the only way I'm able to get anything out there. A lot of crazy stuff has happened recently, and I'm not just talking about the virus. That's the least of my worries right now. I'm writing here to try to work out what's going on, because it's all just so mind-boggling. Maybe some of you can help me. I don't know how though. The whole situation is just freaking me out. Ever since quarantine hit, I've been getting into writing more and more. With all of this free time, what else is there to do? My stimulus check gives me just enough money to make it through each month if I only eat once a day. It's not like I'm moving around too much anyways, so the lack of food is not really a problem. No one is really out and about. My family lives in a different state. I don't have any roommates, and I'm not great at keeping contact with people, so I don't really have anyone to talk to. I also haven't been having any luck on the dating apps I downloaded. So there haven't even been any quarantine violating dates or hookups going on. So, as I was saying, I've been writing a lot more than usual, mostly poems and some short stories, but recently I got inspired to start writing a fantasy novel. For short stories, I don't need to have a fully fledged idea of who the characters are or what they look like. But for novel ideas, I like taking my time painstakingly creating perfect characters. It's a flow of mine as a writer. Since I can get so caught up in who the characters are that I forget about the plot. I wanted to do something to change that, but I didn't know what until I stumbled upon this website called thispersondoesnotexist.com. For those of you who don't know, thispersondoesnotexist.com is a website that uses some sort of artificial intelligence to automatically generate faces of people who, presumably, do not actually exist. Every time you refresh the page, you get a new face. I learned about this website completely by accident. I was watching a YouTube channel run by a person that tracks down and exposes predators online. He found a face of a girl on the website, so he didn't have to use a photo of a real person when catfishing these monsters. As soon as I watched that part of the video, it clicked. I could get myself out of my character creation trap by just refreshing that website a few times, until I found a picture that I could model my characters off of, giving me more time to work on the plot and actually write the story that I wanted to write. The first thing I noticed about this website is that it was a bit surreal. Some of the images looked like they were clearly computer generated, but most of the pictures look like they could be real people. The uncanny valley effect is real on this website, and I found that I got a bit creeped out if I stayed there for too long. But it was very helpful when looking for character models. After a few minutes, I found faces for the best friend, the love interest, the main villain, and some important side characters. The only face that I had left was the face that was going to belong to the main character. None of the faces felt right, no matter how many times I hit refresh. After a few more page refreshes, I saw it. My smiling face. I felt my heart rate spike. It looked exactly like me. My slightly crooked nose, the one dimple that appeared when I smiled, the smallest chip on my right front tooth from a drunken party. Every detail was eerily accurate. I couldn't refresh the page. I don't mean that I was frozen in fear. I clicked the refresh button and the page did not refresh. I tried clicking the little X button on the top left of the browser window, but an error message popped up. Error, this person does not exist. I closed the window and stared at that thing. Me. I don't know. All I knew is that I definitely had to take a break from my computer. It was probably just a glitch. I forced my computer to restart and decided that I should get out of the house for the first time in weeks. A breath of fresh air might be just what the doctor ordered, and it would probably give my computer enough time to restart. I grabbed my keys, phone, and headphones, but decided against wearing my mask. It was past midnight, so there probably wouldn't be too many people walking around anyways. I pulled my hoodie over my head and exited my apartment, locking the door behind me. The air was still. Even though the downtown area is usually pretty noisy, I felt like I could hear a pin drop from the next block. It was as if the whole city was holding its breath. I put on my headphones and began playing some music to make the situation less creepy and began walking. I tried thinking positive thoughts. I don't have to constantly sidestep to avoid other oncoming pedestrians. I could quietly sing songs out loud without getting weird looks. I could breathe easier since I wasn't wearing a mask. These small positives made me feel safe enough to justify walking to the park and then back to my apartment again. The street lamps illuminated the upcoming main road. A homeless man and his dog lay sleeping by a building, the same place they were stationed since the last time I went to get groceries. This dog was usually very easily excitable, even when asleep. However, the large Rottweiler didn't wake up and bark when I approached them. I felt a sense of relief that the man would be able to get some sleep without his dog waking him up. I felt around my sweater pockets for some change, but couldn't find any. I haven't handled cash in a while, since most shopping is now done by card or online. Feeling a bit guilty, I continued walking towards the park. I began to sing and dance a bit to the music as I walked, trying to forget about seeing my face on that website. It had to be a mistake, maybe a glitch. Or maybe I misremembered the image. Something. Maybe I should spend less time on the computer. But what else am I supposed to do during quarantine? Someone was walking out of an apartment building that I was walking towards. A guy, about my age, readjusting his hair as he took out his phone and yawned. He probably just finished a hookup and was checking the bus schedule. A lucky guy. He looked up from his phone as I passed, and I gave him a slight nod. He didn't react. Weird. But he seems exhausted. It's way past midnight after all. He probably just spaced out. I kept walking. When I got to the park, I took a seat on a bench and let my headphones rest around my neck. The darkness was pushed back by the lights of an overhead street lamp, so I could see everything clearly. The great field of grass that stretched out before me is usually a great picnic spot for families, friends, and couples alike. The sounds of laughter and barking dogs were now replaced by empty silence. The field entirely populated by empty picnic tables and trees. It seemed too cold for the bugs to be out, which was a pleasant surprise for a dark summer night like this one. A young woman approached where I was sitting and took a seat on the other side of the bench. Her curly hair was up in a bun, and it looked like she had bags under her eyes. A fellow insomniac, perhaps. She seemed withdrawn, since she barely regarded my existence. She must want to talk to me, though. Otherwise, she probably wouldn't have sat on the same bench as me. I decided to bite the bullet and talk to the first human I've spoken to in a considerably long time. So, you can't sleep either, huh? No reaction. Did she hear me? Tried again. Hey, I was wondering if you wanted to chat for a bit. It's okay if you don't want to. Still no reaction. I guess that's a no. I felt a bit let down, but I didn't want to creep her out more than I already have. I got up to walk back to my apartment, feeling exceptionally embarrassed. As I started walking, the thought of my face on that website entered my mind. I stopped in my tracks. Error. This person does not exist. My heart skipped a beat. Could I really? No, that would be stupid. It's just a website. I'm going to prove it. I walked over to the young woman sitting on the bench. Against my better judgment, I stood directly in front of her and spoke, half expecting to be slapped in the face. This is going to sound crazy, but it's been a bit of a weird night. If you say blue right now, I promise that I will leave, not bother you anymore. The woman opened her mouth and sneezed. She didn't say blue. She didn't react to what I said at all. It was as if I wasn't even there. I waved my hand in front of her face as she stared past me. Still no reaction. Cold realization washed over me. My heart began pounding against my rib cage. I could feel the blood pumping through each individual vein and capillary. I began to hyperventilate. This was really happening. Somehow, I didn't exist. I stood there for a while. It all started making sense. The homeless man's dog not waking up when I walked past. The guy who didn't seem to see me. The woman who wasn't reacting to anything that I was even doing, even though I was acting like a bit of a maniac. No one reacted to anything I did because I didn't exist. No, that's crazy talk. Very, very crazy talk. I have to be dreaming. I pinched my forearm. It hurt, but I didn't wake up. This was very, very bad. I ran back to my apartment to check my computer. Even though I haven't exercised in months, I was running on a reserve of energy I had no idea existed. I was outside of my apartment in a matter of minutes. I impatiently punched in my apartment code and darted inside of the building. I didn't want to wait for the elevator, so I took the stairs 2 at a time. As I approached my floor, I took out my keys. My house key was turning the lock on my apartment door in seconds, and I flung the door open, not caring who I woke up. Sweat made my sweater cling to my body, but that didn't matter. I dashed to my computer. Except it wasn't my computer. The laptop was different. The background was different. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know how to feel. In a futile attempt to rectify the situation, I entered my password. Incorrect password. Please enter a valid password to sign in. Shit. I have to remember to lock my door, said a voice coming from behind me. I was so focused on the computer that I didn't even hear the door open. I quickly closed the laptop and stood up. The woman from the park tossed her sweater on the couch as she made her way to the bedroom. I began to panic, but she still didn't seem to notice me. I didn't exist, and so this wasn't my apartment anymore. I watched her open the laptop that wasn't mine. I decided that it was time for me to leave. I walked outside of the apartment building in a daze. I wandered around the area until I stumbled across a Starbucks and sat down next to the locked door. Through the glass, I could see the chairs all stacked on the tables covered in a thin layer of dust. Everything seemed so bleak. I pulled out my phone to see the default background instead of the familiar image of my childhood cat. I swiped up and the phone unlocked. None of the apps I downloaded were there anymore. All of my contacts and photos were gone. My phone had changed, even though it was with me the entire time. I felt defeated. I needed to prove that I still existed. I am usually a lurker on here, but now I'm getting desperate. That's why I connected to the free Wi-Fi to re-download Reddit and make this account. I don't know how much longer this will go on, but I hope it's not much longer. I need reassurance. I need recognition. I need help. Please help me.